I didn't walk into her office expecting anything remarkable. I had seen therapists before, dozens maybe. Some kind, some clinical, some forgettable. I had grown used to the rhythm of introductions, the hollow clinking of mugs on tables, the sterile warmth of offices lined with neatly arranged books and tasteful abstract paintings. Her space was no different at first glance. A neutral palette, dim lighting, the faint scent of sandalwood, and something softer, like warm paper. But there was something about the way the light hit the floor, the way the shadows moved just slightly when she turned her head, that unsettled me. She sat across from me, legs crossed, hands resting on her knees. Her posture was open but still, like a dancer waiting for the music to cue her next move. I remember noticing her hair first. It was pulled back messily, not for fashion, but for function. There was no jewelry, no distractions, just her face. Olive-toned skin, strong cheekbones, the kind of lips that looked naturally dry but perfectly shaped, like they had been pressed into too many books and forgotten cups of coffee. Her eyes weren't piercing. They were absorbing. I felt them scanning me gently, without pressure, like she was reading a language I didn't know I spoke. I began to talk. I said the usual things, that I was tired, that I was stuck, that my marriage felt like wallpaper and my career like an old jacket I kept wearing because I didn't know what else to put on. I mentioned anxiety, sleeplessness, a hollow kind of dread that hovered somewhere behind my ribs. She didn't nod excessively. She didn't interrupt. There was something in her silence that made me feel like I was speaking into a well and the water at the bottom was listening. As I spoke, I found myself leaning forward, not because I needed to be heard, but because I wanted to be closer. I caught myself watching the way her fingers flexed slightly every few minutes, the way her breath subtly changed when I mentioned certain memories. She had a presence that didn't demand attention, but gently commanded it. I couldn't place the feeling then. It wasn't attraction, not exactly. It was awareness. A kind of soft, gravitational pull I couldn't explain. Toward the end of the session, she spoke more. She mentioned that I seemed disconnected from my body, that my words floated above me, detached and abstract. She said it wasn't uncommon for women like me, women who had spent years carrying others, fixing things, maintaining appearances. She offered a method, something called focusing, or somatic attention, I think. A way of guiding awareness into physical sensation, into presence. She explained it clinically, rationally, as if she were offering me a glass of water. But I felt heat bloom in my chest at the idea, not from embarrassment, from something I didn't yet understand. I agreed. Of course I did. I didn't ask for details. I didn't care what the research said. I just said yes, trying to sound casual, pretending like this was just another technique, another box to tick on the long list of things I was doing to fix myself. She smiled once, almost imperceptibly, and made a note in her journal. There was no glint of victory in her expression, no hint of manipulation, and yet I felt something shift, like the room had tilted 1 degree to the left and I hadn't noticed until now. When I walked out of her office, the air felt sharper. The city outside sounded louder. My skin tingled in a way I hadn't expected, like something had been stirred under the surface. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was just nerves, just the weight of honesty catching up with me. But the truth was, I already couldn't stop thinking about her. Not what she had said, but how she had said it. Not what we had done, but what hadn't happened. What was waiting behind that professional mask, that careful tone, that pause before she ended the session? In the days that followed, I replayed that session in my mind over and over. Her voice, low and deliberate, the way she held eye contact for 1 beat longer than necessary, the moment her fingers adjusted the hem of her sweater, revealing the edge of her collarbone, the way she closed her notebook with one hand while the other remained still on her lap. These were small things, insignificant really, and yet they clung to me like static on skin. I told myself it was projection, that I was lonely, vulnerable, primed to attach, but the truth gnawed at me in quieter ways, in the way I picked out my clothes for the next session, in the way I practiced speaking more slowly, more clearly, as if I wanted her to really hear me, really see me. I started watching the clock more obsessively as the days crawled forward toward our next appointment. I ignored the part of me that wondered what I was really going for, the therapy or the proximity. The night before our second meeting, I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling for hours. My husband was asleep beside me, his breath steady, his hand resting flat on the sheets. I watched the way the light from a passing car moved across the wall. I imagined her face in that light, her hands, her voice. I imagined her asking me to focus on my body, on what I was feeling right now, and I realized with an almost cruel clarity that I had already begun. I had already started noticing things, the tightness in my hips when I sat too long, the pulse in my wrist when I thought of her eyes, the ache in my chest that I couldn't quite place, like longing wrapped in silk. It was subtle but present, constant, alive, and it terrified me. Not because it was wrong, but because it felt like the beginning of something I couldn't control, something I hadn't planned. And somewhere in the quiet center of that fear, buried deep beneath logic and shame, was a flicker of desire. Small, bright, impossible to ignore. I knew I would walk into that office again. I knew I wouldn't be the same when I left. The second session began with a strange sense of anticipation, like standing on the edge of something I couldn't see but could already feel pulling me forward. I had dressed differently, not obviously, not provocatively, but with care I hadn't given myself in months. My blouse was softer, slightly looser at the collar, and my jeans hugged my hips just enough to remind me that I still had a body. I wore perfume, barely noticeable, but I wondered if she would notice. My palms were slightly dank as I waited outside her office, and my heart carried a nervous thrum that had nothing to do with anxiety and everything to do with wanting something I couldn't name. When the door opened, the lighting was lower than before. The blinds were partially closed, letting in filtered sunlight that moved like water across the floor. The air smelled the same, wood, warmth, and that faint trace of something floral, maybe her skin or her clothes. She gestured for me to sit, not on the usual chair, but on a thick mat on the floor. A small ritual table had been set near the wall with a candle already flickering, the flame steady and slow. I took off my shoes without being asked, my socks too. She said nothing. I followed her silently, obediently, as if I had agreed to more than I realized. We sat cross-legged, facing each other. Her knees nearly touched mine. She explained the practice again, this time not as theory but as invitation. Focus on the body, not the thoughts. Feel, don't analyze. Breathe, don't interpret. Her voice dropped into something deeper, slower, as if she were reading from a sacred script only I could hear. She guided me into stillness, asked me to close my eyes and bring my awareness into my feet, my ankles, my legs. Her tone brushed against me like velvet, low and close, and I followed it helplessly. At first, it was simple. I noticed the floor beneath me, the tension in my shoulders, the shallow way I had been breathing. But then her presence began to change things. I could feel her across from me, not just as a person, but as heat, gravity, atmosphere. I imagined her watching me, tracking the small shifts in my posture, the way my chest rose and fell. When she instructed me to inhale slowly and exhale even slower, I did it, But with every breath, something inside me began to stir, an ache, a tremble, a kind of hum below thought. Then came her hands. Without warning, she moved forward and placed one palm gently on my shoulder, the other on my upper back. The touch was light, professional, but my entire body tensed and then softened under it. My eyes stayed shut. I couldn't have opened them if I tried. Her hands remained there for a long time, not pressing, just anchoring. The warmth of her skin soaked through the thin fabric of my blouse. My breath hitched once, and I heard her exhale in response, as if catching it. She told me to bring my attention to my chest, to notice the weight, the rhythm, the sensation of breath meeting rib. My skin burned beneath her hand. I was suddenly hyper-aware of the curve of my breasts, the faint brush of my bra, the way my nipples tightened under the fabric. Her hand moved slightly, barely a shift, but it felt like she was adjusting a dial inside me. I felt exposed, raw, as if she had pulled a thread and unraveled something I hadn't meant to show. Her voice faded into background sound, like distant waves. All I could feel was her palm on my body and the way her breath occasionally brushed my face as she leaned closer to adjust her touch. She asked me to place my own hand on my stomach. I did, and in the space between our palms, something passed. Heat, energy, tension. I imagined her heartbeat syncing with mine, imagined her skin against mine without layers, imagined what it would feel like to lean forward, to close the space entirely. When she asked me to shift my attention lower, to the pelvis, the hips, the thighs, my entire body went quiet inside, not numb, aware. Her hand was gone now, but its echo remained like a brand. My pulse throbbed low, between my legs, heavy and insistent. I felt warmth there, undeniable, a slow wave of pressure that made me want to move, to arch, to ask for something without words. I didn't. I sat perfectly still, but I knew she could sense the shift. I wondered if she could smell it, the faint, unmistakable scent of arousal blooming just beneath the surface of calm. She returned to sit in front of me again. I could sense her closeness without needing to look. My eyes remained closed, my breath carefully measured, but everything inside me was chaos. She asked me how I felt. I answered quietly, a few words about tension and release. It was a lie. I felt like a match waiting to ignite, like my skin had learned to listen. The session ended gently. She rang a small bell, a sound so pure it felt like water in my ears. I opened my eyes slowly, blinking against the dimness. She was looking at me, not with analysis or pity, but with stillness. She said I had done well, that my body was starting to speak. I nodded, unsure what to do with my hands, my eyes, my racing heart. She handed me a glass of water. Our fingers brushed. It was a second, but it flooded me with sensation. I left the office slowly, like moving through water. Everything felt louder, brighter, more fragile. My thighs were slick beneath my jeans. My mouth was dry. I didn't go home. I walked aimlessly for an hour, letting the air cool my face, trying to make sense of the pulsing heat between my legs, the persistent echo of her hands on my body. That night, in the silence of my bedroom, I laid down on the sheets with the lights off and my clothes still on. I closed my eyes and tried to remember her voice, her breath, the exact weight of her palm. My hand moved slowly under my waistband, seeking the place that still tingled with memory. When I touched myself, I did it not thinking of fantasy or lust, but of her mouth shaping words, of her hands guiding my breath, of her body near mine in stillness. I came quietly, quickly, the way a dam breaks after weeks of pressure. My breath hitched, my eyes stayed closed, and I whispered her name without meaning to, barely audible, like a secret between my body and the dark. When I opened my eyes, I felt something new. Not shame, not confusion, something sharper, more dangerous, hunger. Not just for touch, but for her, for what she knew, for what she could unlock. The next session was already on my calendar, and I was already imagining how far I might let her go. The third session began before I even walked into the room. My body had started anticipating her presence the moment I woke up. Everything I did that day felt like a rehearsal, choosing what to wear, how to breathe, how to quiet my thoughts without muting them completely. I settled on a soft, loose sweater that slid slightly off one shoulder and a pair of leggings that clung just enough. I told myself it was for comfort, for ease during movement, but the truth pulsed beneath every choice. I wanted to be touched. I wanted to be seen. When I entered her office, the air felt different, warmer, dimmer. The blinds were completely drawn this time, and the candle on the table was already lit, the flame flickering steadily in the thickened silence. A soft, ambient hum played in the background, something slow and rhythmic that seemed to mimic the cadence of breath. She didn't direct me to the chair. She gestured to the mat on the floor again, but this time there were pillows arranged at the edges and a folded blanket placed carefully nearby. I understood without explanation that the session would go deeper, that the walls between technique and something else had already begun to dissolve. I slipped off my shoes and sat down cross-legged. My legs were slightly tense, not from discomfort, but from anticipation. She sat opposite me again, her posture mirroring mine, and her presence once more expanded to fill every inch of the space between us. She spoke softly, guiding me inward again, but this time her voice felt less like instruction and more like invocation. She asked me to bring attention to my breathing, to follow the air from my nostrils down into my chest, into my stomach, into the base of my spine. I followed willingly, eyes closed, letting the familiar rhythm settle me. Then came the shift. She asked me to place my hands on my torso, just above my abdomen, and feel the movement there as I breathed. I did. My palms pressed lightly into the soft flesh, my breath shallow at first, then deepening. I became aware of how my skin warmed under my own touch, how my fingers splayed instinctively to cover more surface. Her voice reminded me to stay present, to observe sensation without judgment. Then I heard the gentle creak of her body shifting, moving closer. When I opened my eyes, she was kneeling beside me. She asked if I would be open to light physical guidance again. I nodded, the motion small but certain. She reached forward and gently lifted the hem of my sweater, asking me to breathe more freely through the diaphragm. I raised my arms, and she helped me pull it over my head. I wasn't wearing a bra. The air felt cool against my skin, but her gaze warmed it instantly. She didn't stare. She simply looked, clinical, calm, but utterly aware. She placed one hand gently on my sternum and the other between my shoulder blades. I felt myself exhale in a long, trembling sigh. Her touch was firm, grounding. She pressed lightly as I breathed in, encouraging expansion, then softened her hand as I exhaled, guiding my body to release. It was mechanical, instructional, but the way my skin responded had nothing to do with technique. Goosebumps rose across my chest and arms. A pulse began to flutter low in my pelvis. My nipples, exposed and already sensitive from the air, tightened under the weight of her proximity. I kept my eyes closed, afraid that meeting hers would unravel whatever fragile boundary still remained. She moved behind me, placing her knees on either side of my hips, not touching, but close enough for heat to pass between us. Her hands moved to my sides, thumbs resting beneath my ribs, and she asked me to focus on the internal sensation of space. I tried to think of air and lungs and expansion, but all I could feel was her, surrounding me, shaping me, molding the moment like clay. Her fingers pressed slowly into the tension just beneath my breasts, sliding upward with each inhale, downward with each exhale. My head tilted back slightly, and I felt the arch of my spine inviting more. Then, without speaking, she guided my arms down to my thighs and placed her palms flat against my back. She leaned in just enough for her chest to skim my shoulders, and for a brief moment, I thought I felt her lips near my ear. I wasn't sure if it was breath or skin, but the shiver it sent through me was unmistakable. My thighs clenched instinctively, my breath catching in my throat. She told me to stay with the sensation. I did. I let it consume me. She asked if I was willing to explore deeper bodily awareness. I nodded again. She gently shifted me onto my back, adjusting the pillows under my head, placing a folded towel beneath my knees. I lay there, topless, eyes open now, watching her as she moved with intention. She sat beside me and placed one hand flat on my lower abdomen. Her other hand slid under my back, supporting the curve just above my tailbone. She asked me to breathe again, this time into the pelvis, into the hips, into the space most of us are taught to ignore. As I inhaled, her fingers followed the movement. As I exhaled, they stayed. She applied slow, steady pressure, drawing awareness into parts of me I had long since numbed. I felt a flutter low in my belly, an ache that had no words, only need. Her touch never crossed a line, not in any obvious way, but it hovered at the very edge of something unspeakable. The tips of her fingers brushed the waistband of my leggings, and I wanted nothing more than for her to slide them lower, to reach inside and find what I was too afraid to offer. Instead, she remained still, hands warm and patient. She asked what I felt. I couldn't speak. My breath had grown erratic, shallow, my chest rising and falling like waves pulling back from shore. She moved her hands slowly up my torso again, tracing a path between my ribs, her thumbs grazing the underside of my breasts, not touching fully, but close enough for sensation to bloom and spread. My body was trembling, my skin was alive, my thoughts were drowning in the sea of feeling. She whispered something about embodiment, about permission, about listening to the language of sensation. But I could no longer separate her voice from the pulse between my legs. My hips shifted involuntarily, seeking friction that wouldn't come. Her hand rested just below my navel, grounding me again. She told me I was safe, and for a moment, I believed her. When the session ended, she helped me sit up slowly. My sweater lay crumpled beside me. I reached for it, but she stopped me gently, wrapping the blanket around my shoulders instead. Her hand brushed my neck as she adjusted the fabric. Her eyes met mine for a long moment, unreadable, neutral but not detached. There was something in her gaze I couldn't place, acknowledgement, perhaps, or anticipation. I left the office with my heart pounding and thighs aching with unmet tension. My nipples still throbbed under the fabric. My skin still carried the imprint of her touch. That night, I lay in bed again, naked this time, and touched myself without shame. I traced the path of her hands with my own. I imagined her watching, guiding, whispering. When I came, it was with her name on my lips, quiet and desperate, like a confession. But it wasn't guilt I felt afterward. It was clarity. Something had been set in motion, and I knew, without question, that I would let it continue. I arrived early, too early. I sat in my car with the engine off, watching the second hand on my watch tick forward like a slow metronome. My breath fogged the windshield in steady bursts, and I couldn't decide if I felt calm or on the edge of some irreversible decision. My hands were restless in my lap, one thumb brushing over the other, the movement automatic, nervous. I kept telling myself that it was just another session, that it was just breath and body and focus. But the weight in my stomach told another story. The truth was, I didn't know where this was going anymore. I only knew I wanted it to go further. When I finally stepped into the building, the familiar hallway felt unfamiliar, like walking through the echo of a dream. Her office door was slightly ajar, as if expecting me. I pushed it open gently, and she was already there, seated on the mat, barefoot, serene, lit only by the soft glow of the standing lamp in the corner. Her presence hit me with quiet force. She didn't move to greet me. She just watched as I entered, her gaze level, unreadable. I closed the door behind me, and the latch clicked louder than it should have. I took off my shoes, folded my coat over the chair, and stepped onto the mat. She patted the space beside her. My legs felt loose and warm as I lowered myself, knees brushing the floor, body humming with unspent tension. The room was warmer than usual. The air was thick, not stifling, but intimate. I could smell her skin, something clean and unsweetened, and the faint warmth of her breath as she turned slightly toward me. We didn't begin the usual way. No small talk, no verbal transition. She simply leaned closer and reached for the edge of the blanket draped behind her, placing it across both of our laps. Our thighs touched beneath the fabric. I inhaled sharply, and she noticed but said nothing. Instead, she placed one hand on my thigh, palm down, fingers relaxed, and told me to close my eyes and feel the weight of contact. I obeyed. The moment her skin met mine, the rest of the room dissolved. Her touch was quiet but absolute, not grasping, not hesitant. It simply existed, and in its existence, my body began to unravel. She told me to breathe, to bring awareness into the space between our knees, the line of warmth where our legs pressed together. I could feel my blood rushing downward, pooling with intention. Her hand moved slowly, not up, not down, but just slightly, tracing lazy semicircles against the inside of my thigh. I shifted almost imperceptibly, and her hand stilled, as if waiting to see if I would retreat. I didn't. Then she moved behind me, settling her body flush with my back. I felt the contour of her breasts through the fabric of her shirt, the arch of her spine aligning with mine. She placed her arms gently around my waist, not in an embrace, but in containment. I exhaled with a tremble. Her mouth hovered near my ear, and I could feel the heat of every breath she released. She told me to breathe with her. I followed, syncing with her rhythm, letting her set the pace. Her fingers slid under the hem of my top, cool against the heat of my stomach. I felt my muscles tighten, my breath catch, but I didn't stop her. She began to guide me backward, slowly, so I was leaning against her chest, my body pliant, hers solid. Her hand moved higher, resting just beneath the curve of my ribs, while the other drifted downward, cupping the space between my hip and groin. She wasn't touching me in any officially inappropriate place, not yet, but the proximity was electric. My nipples were hard beneath my bra, straining against the fabric, and I could feel the flush spread across my chest and neck. She asked me to bring awareness to my center. I did. Her hand followed, pressing slightly deeper against my lower belly, circling in small, anchoring motions. Her fingers brushed the waistband of my leggings. I held my breath. Then, with a deliberate slowness, she slid her hand just beneath the elastic, letting her fingertips rest against my skin. She paused there, and I could feel the entire world narrow to that single point of contact. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. She took her time, letting her hand explore without intrusion, skimming the surface, never pushing, never demanding. Her breath was steady, her body warm behind mine. I could feel my pulse between my legs, a deep and rhythmic throb that had no name, only urgency. Her fingers dipped lower, grazing the top of my underwear, and I instinctively tilted my hips, offering more without realizing it. That was all it took. She shifted me gently onto my back, her movements fluid, practiced, almost choreographed. I watched her now, fully awake in my skin, heart pounding. She knelt beside me, one hand sliding up my inner thigh, the other moving to unfasten the button of my leggings. She didn't ask. She didn't hesitate. She peeled them down slowly, exposing the cotton of my underwear, damp already. She touched me through the fabric, pressing lightly, her fingers reading me like braille. I gasped, my hips lifting, needing friction, needing more. She leaned down, her mouth brushing the skin just above my waistband, and then she pulled my underwear aside. Her fingers slipped between my folds, parting me gently, tracing circles with maddening restraint. I writhed beneath her, not from pain or surprise, but from the sheer intensity of sensation. Every nerve felt lit, awake, urgent. She explored slowly, deliberately, like she was mapping sacred ground. When she found my clit, she didn't rush. She circled it with agonizing control, her other hand resting on my sternum, grounding me, owning me. I moaned, low and involuntary, a sound pulled from someplace deep. She didn't speak. She never spoke, but her touch said everything. I came with a quiet cry, back arched, muscles clenched, tears pricking at the corners of my eyes. It wasn't release, it was revelation. She stayed with me through the aftershocks, her hands gentler now, brushing hair from my face, wiping sweat from my temples. She kissed my collarbone, just once, soft and slow, and it made my chest ache with something I didn't want to examine. We sat in silence afterward, our bodies close but not entwined, our breathing slow and matched. She helped me dress with the same quiet care, folding the blanket, smoothing the mat, never rushing, never avoiding. There was no shame, no awkwardness, only a thick, velvety quiet between us, filled with something too complex to name. When I left, the sun had begun to set. The air outside was crisp, sharp, smelling faintly of pine. I walked to my car barefoot, my shoes dangling from my hand, my feet kissing the cold pavement. I didn't feel exposed. I felt rewritten. There was no going back. I had crossed the line. Or maybe she had. And the most terrifying part was that I didn't want to return. Everything after that night existed in a strange split, what the world saw and what actually was. I returned to my routines, my job, my family, the gentle rituals of domestic survival, but I moved through them like a shadow layered over another version of myself. Outwardly, I was the same. I still answered emails, folded laundry, made polite conversation with my husband at dinner. But under the surface, I pulsed with memory, heat, anticipation. I had become two women, one who functioned in daylight and one who came alive only in the presence of her hands, her breath, her silence. Our sessions continued. They were no longer therapy. They had become encounters, intimate, secret, addictive. She didn't schedule me like a client anymore. I was always the last appointment, always in the final slot, after the light had faded from the windows and the building had grown quiet. I would walk in with my body already alert, already wanting, and she would guide me without words. Sometimes we undressed slowly. Sometimes she pulled me onto her the moment the door locked. There were nights I knelt between her legs, worshiping her with my mouth until she trembled against the couch, her hands in my hair, low sounds escaping her lips like hymns. Other nights, she lay me across her table and traced every inch of me with her tongue, making me beg in silence with my thighs shaking around her shoulders. We never kissed like lovers. She rarely touched my face. Her affection lived in the way she moved my body, the way she entered me with fingers soaked in care, but never tenderness. It wasn't romantic. It was clinical. It was precise. And I let it be that way. I convinced myself that what we had was sacred in its own design, something that could not exist outside those four walls, something too fragile or dangerous for definition. But there were cracks. She never texted me, never called, never followed up. When I tried to initiate contact outside of our sessions, she ignored it. Not rudely, just coldly, as if I didn't exist beyond my appointment slot. I rationalized it as boundaries, as ethics, as professionalism warped by desire. But something gnawed at me. I had opened myself to her completely, my thoughts, my fears, my body, and yet I knew almost nothing about her. She was a mystery I wanted to preserve, but one I also began to resent. Then, one evening, I arrived 10 minutes early. The hallway was dark and quiet as usual. Her office door was closed. I stood there, hesitating, until I heard it, a voice, faint but unmistakable, not hers, not mine. I leaned closer. My breath caught. There was movement inside, a muffled laugh, a soft moan. I stepped back, heart racing, unsure of what to do with what I had heard. I should have left. I should have walked away, pretended I hadn't been early, hadn't heard anything, hadn't felt anything crack open in my chest. But I didn't. I waited. I waited until the door opened and a woman emerged. Younger, flushed, her shirt askew, her lips red. She didn't see me standing in the shadows. I didn't want her to. I watched as she adjusted her scarf, glanced around, and disappeared down the hallway. Then the door opened again. My therapist, my lover, my handler, my manipulator, looked out into the hall with practiced calm. Her eyes swept past me, then backtracked. We locked eyes for half a second. No surprise in hers, just awareness. She stepped aside and gestured for me to enter. That night, she was more attentive than usual, more intense. She pressed me harder against the wall, bit me where her mouth used to soothe. I bled for her a little, and she didn't stop, and I didn't ask her to. I came violently, nearly sobbing, and afterward she simply helped me dress like always, tucking my shirt back into my jeans with cool hands. I didn't mention the woman in the hallway. I didn't ask who she was. I didn't need to. I knew. I began to unravel quietly after that. Not all at once, just in pieces. I still went to her. I still let her inside me. But the space between our bodies felt different now. I saw things I hadn't before. The way she maintained a perfect emotional distance, no matter how raw I became. The way she never undressed fully, never offered her own vulnerability in return. I had believed we were equal in our exchange, but I had been giving her everything while she measured what she gave back, ounce by ounce, like medicine she didn't want me to overdose on. I started fantasizing about breaking her. Not violently, just emotionally. I wanted to see her unravel. I wanted to see her need me. I wanted to hear her whisper my name in the dark with the same desperation I had once held for her. But it never happened. She remained composed, cool, impeccable. She smiled when I cried. She moaned when I begged. But she never once let go. So I changed the rules. One night, I brought my phone. I didn't plan it. Or maybe I had. I tucked it into my bag, turned off the sound, and left it recording the moment I stepped through the door. She greeted me with the usual gaze, warm, unreadable, and began undressing me slowly. I positioned my bag carefully on the couch, lens angled just enough. When she dropped to her knees between my thighs and pressed her mouth against me, I closed my eyes and tilted my head back, letting the camera see everything. Her hands on my hips, her tongue inside me, her breath against my skin. It was beautiful, precise, clinical, and utterly damning. Later that night, I watched it alone in the dark. Not once, twice, 3 times. I studied her face, the angles of her jaw, the way her fingers moved like instruments. I didn't feel shame. I felt power. I had finally taken something back. Proof, control, witness. I uploaded the video to a private folder, sent the link to myself, then to another address. I don't remember what name I used. I don't even remember pressing send. I only remember the stillness afterward, the silence of the room, the hollowness of victory. In the mirror, I saw myself, flushed, marked, not ruined, but altered. I realized then that I didn't want her to love me. I wanted her to fall. And maybe I already knew how. There was no intimacy left, only strategy, only the sharp edge beneath the softness, only the double bottom where everything sinks. The morning after I sent the video, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea that had long gone cold. The room around me was quiet, still laced with the smell of last night's rain and the faint perfume of laundry detergent. The hum of the refrigerator had never sounded louder. Everything ordinary had taken on a strange sharpness, like the silence before a scream. I checked my email twice, then again. Nothing yet. No reply. No call, no collapse. I had expected something, a sign, a ripple, but the world remained disinterested, unmoved, as if the weight of what I had done hadn't yet reached the surface. Later that afternoon, I got a text confirming my next appointment, same day, same time, as if nothing had happened. My chest tightened as I stared at the message. Part of me wanted to cancel, to run, to disappear into the comforting numbness of avoidance. But a darker part of me, a part I had only recently become acquainted with, felt a jolt of thrill. She didn't know, or worse, she did, and she didn't care. Either way, I would go. That evening, I dressed slowly, carefully. I chose a dress I hadn't worn in years, one that clung to my hips and revealed just enough shoulder to make my presence feel deliberate. I painted my lips with something darker than usual and slipped my phone into the small inner pocket of my coat. I felt like I was walking towards something irreversible, a line already crossed but not yet acknowledged. The sky was pale and blank above me, as if even the atmosphere had decided to withhold judgment. When I arrived, the hallway was silent. Her office door stood ajar, just like always. That familiar soft light spilled into the hall, and the air inside was warm and scented. The space hadn't changed. The mat was still there, the folded blanket, the pillow she used to position my body. She turned to me with that same gaze, neutral, open, falsely tender. Her voice was soft as ever, and her hands as confident. She guided me to the floor. I obeyed her like I always did, but something in me was rigid, different. We didn't speak much. There were no preliminary instructions, no mention of the method or the body. She just began. Her hands moved over me with practiced reverence. She undressed me with deliberate patience, exposing my skin in slow layers, brushing her fingers over each new inch with a precision that once made me ache. But tonight, I felt outside of it, floating somewhere above the scene, watching her move like a ritual she'd performed many times. I wondered how many other women had felt chosen here. How many had moaned into her mouth, cried into her hands, whispered thanks in the breathless aftermath of whatever she convinced them to believe was healing. She touched me like always. Her mouth moved over my body with quiet intention. She made me come quickly, efficiently, as if hitting a pressure point she knew by memory. My thighs shook, but it didn't feel holy this time. It felt rehearsed. I didn't resist her. I didn't push her away. I let her have me the way she always had, because tonight wasn't about denial. Tonight was about exposure. Afterward, she wiped my skin with a warm cloth and pressed a kiss to my hip. I lay there, limbs loose, breath shallow. She sat beside me, dressing in silence. I sat up, slowly, pulling the blanket across my lap. I looked at her, really looked. The curve of her back, the soft arc of her neck, her hair tucked behind her ears in that clinical way that used to make me feel safe. And then she turned. Our eyes met. There was no affection in her gaze, no guilt, just calm, stillness, authority. And I realized with bone-deep certainty that she had always known exactly what she was doing. I stood without speaking, dressed, gathered my things. As I moved toward the door, I heard her voice one last time, low, measured, almost affectionate. It wrapped around me like a thread I wanted to cut. I didn't turn back. The walk to the car was slow. The air was thick and unmoving. My skin still tingled with the residue of her touch, but it felt like residue from a stranger now, something I needed to wash away. I sat in the driver's seat with my hands on the wheel for a long time before starting the engine. I didn't cry. I didn't feel victorious. I just felt hollow. That night, I logged in and checked the folder. The video had been viewed. Twice. No comments, no downloads, just opened, observed. The silence that followed was more deafening than anything I could have prepared for. There was no explosion, no scandal, just an emptiness that spread through me like smoke in a locked room. The following week, her name disappeared from the clinic website. Her number was disconnected. The building stayed open, but her office stood dark. No explanation, no closure, just absence. I became obsessed with checking. Reddit threads, anonymous boards, even the state licensing site. Days passed, then weeks. Nothing surfaced, no fallout, no reckoning. She vanished as cleanly as a shadow pulled from the wall. And I was left with myself, with my body, with the memory of how I let her make me, break me, use me, and how I used her right back. Sometimes, late at night, I play the video, not for arousal, not for revenge, just to remember that it was real, that I let it happen, that I reached for it. I study the way I looked at her, the way I opened my legs, the way she touched me without tenderness. I listened to the silence between us, the foreign noise that only I could hear. The part of me that believed it meant something. And then I shut it off. I go to the bathroom, I brush my teeth, I strip, I stand in front of the mirror naked, and I whisper the question that never leaves me. Did she create the darkness in me, or did she simply uncover it? And then I smile, just slightly, because I already know the answer. I just don't want to say it out loud.